Hi again and welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at more Greek vocabulary that has to do with speech and thought. Greek has several more or less synonymous verbs for speech and vocalization. One is a me verb, phemi, which means I say, speak, or talk. One thing to notice about this is that in the aorist, this is what we call a thematic second aorist. It takes regular second aorist endings, but the second aorist stem is fe, just the phi eta. And with that long eta at the end of the stem, the eta actually takes over the role of the connecting vowel. So the first person singular in the second aorist is ephein instead of ephon. The second person singular is ephes instead of fs. And the third person singular is ephe instead of ephe. And in the plural, we have ephemen, epheta, and epheson. Lego also means I say, speak, or talk. And this is a very common second aorist verb. The second aorist stem is ape, so the first person singular is apon, I said, or I spoke. Finally, we have laleo, which is a very regular verb, and again means I say, I speak, or I talk. Some verbs emphasize the simple act of vocalization rather than actually speaking words. One of these is phoneo, which means I call, shout, or I make a sound. And you just have to notice that that's an epsilon contract verb and take that contract vowel into account. Another similar verb is kradzo, which means I shout or I cry out. And this, again, is a fairly regular verb. You just have to remember that that zeta at the end of the stem, krads, acts a lot like a kappa when it runs up against a sigma tense marker. So if you remember from our square of stops, kappa or zeta plus sigma equals a xi. So the first aorist is ekraxa with a xi that is formed from the zeta plus the sigma tense marker. And the future similarly in the first person singular is kraxo, I will shout or I will cry out. Greek has several verbs for speech with specific functions. So eulogeo means I bless. And notice that that's another epsilon contract verb. On the other hand, aspadzamai means I greet or welcome. I welcome. Notice that this is a middle-only verb, or some would call it a deponent verb. And also that the first aorist middle form is aspasamein. Now the eta at the beginning isn't surprising. That's the lengthened alpha when it combines with the augment. What's a little bit surprising here is that the zeta at the end of the stem, when it combines with the sigma, doesn't become a xi like we see often. Instead, the zeta is absorbed by the sigma. So instead of aspaxamein, we have aspasamein. Peitho means I persuade or I convince. And in the first aorist, again, we have the final stem consonant absorbed by the sigma. In this case, it's the theta at the end of peith. And instead of epeithsa, which you can really sound would be, or you can hear it, that it would be difficult to pronounce, the theta drops out and we just have epeisa, I persuaded. Similarly, the future is peso, I will persuade, I will convince. Erotao means I ask or request. That's an alpha contract verb. And apokrinomai another middle-only verb, means I answer or I reply. Notice that this is a liquid first aorist because the nu at the end of the apokrin stem absorbs the sigma tense marker. So it takes the regular first aorist endings, but with no sigma tense marker. That means the first person singular will be apokrinamen, no sigma. And just notice that the apo at the beginning of apokrinamai is a prefix, and so the epsilon augment goes after the prefix. Instead of apokrinamen, we have apekrinamen. Here are two more verbs for speech that has a specific function. Keleuo means I command or I order. And notice that because it's an epsilon upsilon diphthong, u, at the end of the stem, even though there's a vowel there, it's not a contract verb. So you would have the sigma go on right after the epsilon upsilon for ekeleusa and similar forms. Kerusso is a common verb in the New Testament, meaning I proclaim, I declare, I announce, or I preach. And again, the double sigma acts a little bit like a kappa here when it meets the sigma tense marker of the aorist or future, and the double sigma plus another sigma forms a xi. Don't ask me why, this is just the way it usually works. So the first aorist of kerusso is ekeruxa, and the future is keruxo, I will proclaim. One fairly large word family is the angelo word family. Angelo means I tell, I inform, or I make known. And one of the things to watch here is that in the aorist, angelo is an irregular first aorist. So it takes first aorist endings with the alpha connecting vowel, and it acts like a liquid first aorist in the sense that the sigma tense marker is absorbed by the lambda at the end of the stem. But the stem itself changes as if it were a second aorist. So instead of angela, we have angela. The epsilon lambda lambda changes to an epsilon iota lambda. And so the first aorist is angela, I told, I informed. Similarly, we have an irregular future stem. Now this again acts like a liquid future in that the sigma tense marker is absorbed by the lambda at the end of the stem. But notice that the second lambda drops out in the future. And in fact, that's the only way of differentiating between the present tense and the future tense. Angelo with two lambdas is present tense, I tell. But angelo with one lambda is future tense, I will tell. Notice also that the first person plural future, for some reason, acts as if there's an epsilon in front of the ending, and instead of angelomen, we have angelumen, just in the future first person plural. Angelo gives us the noun angelos, which is a messenger, and this is the noun that often gets translated angel in the New Testament, which is really just a transliteration of angelos. Now, I said that angelo has a whole word family, and most of the other forms in this family are created by adding a prepositional prefix onto the beginning of angelo. So epangelomai, which is also a middle-only verb, means I promise. And notice that the aorist still is irregular in the same way that angelo was. We have the first aorist form epangelamen with the angel stem and the first aorist endings, no sigma tense marker. And just notice that because the ep is a prefix on the beginning of epengelemai. Again, the augment is added after the ep, and in this case it lengthens the alpha at the beginning of the main verb stem. So we get epengelamein. From epengelemai, we get the noun epengelia, which is just a promise. All of the other verbs in the angelo word family share the same irregular aorist and future as angelo does. So we have ap angelo, which means, again, I tell, I announce, I proclaim. And we have per angelo, which means I command or I order. And from that we get the noun perangelia, which is just a command or order. And it's also in this family that we find the very important verb euangelizomai. Now, this isn't formed just by putting a prefix on angelo. There's also the ids suffix on the end of the stem, but this is related to angelo. Euangelizomai means I announce a great message, or I preach good news. And sometimes this is translated preach the gospel or proclaim the gospel. I prefer not to use the term gospel because it's not an ordinary English word. And euangelizomai wasn't specialized religious language. It was a common verb that was used in all kinds of political contexts for announcing any kind of great important message, especially positive messages. So I encourage you, instead of saying I preach the gospel, to say I preach good news or I announce a great message. The first aorist of euangelizomai is euangelisamein. And you'll notice that this actually is much more regular than most of the angelo verbs are. Again, partly because we have the ids suffix, and so we don't have all of the irregular stem change. We do have to remember that the augment gets added after the u prefix, so it's euangelisamein. And we also have to remember that here, as we saw with one of the verbs above, the zeta, when it runs into the sigma, disappears, and we have euangelisamein instead of euangelixamein or something like that. We just have the sigma. From euangelizomai, we get the noun euangelion, which again means good news, a great announcement, or in more sort of Christianese language, gospel. Some other general terms for speech, nouns for speech, include he phone, from phoneo, which just means a sound, a noise, or a voice. He lexis means words, speech, or a text, and that's from lego. And taurema, which means speech or utterance, not so much speech as language, but just the spoken sounds are the focus when we use the term rema. Don't miss that rough breathing mark either over the initial row. A couple common words for sending include apostello, I send, and this is used when sending someone on a mission, often for sending a representative, but it can also just be for sending someone with a message for the neighbors or something like that as well. The noun apostolos means a representative, an ambassador, or an apostle. The word apostle actually was not unique Christian language. This is just the transliteration of the Greek term apostolos. And so Paul and the other apostles are being called ambassadors of God, the official representatives of God. On the other hand, if we want to invite someone, we use the verb kaleo. This means I call, and it can even be used for calling people in the sense of naming them something, but it can also mean I summon or I invite. So this can be used for addressing someone with a raised voice or from a distance. I call out. But it's also used for calling someone in the sense of summoning them. And this can be either calling somebody, summoning them if they're under your authority, or it can be for more polite invitations between equals or even to a superior. Speech was always very closely related in the ancient mind with thought. Thought was understood as a kind of inner speech. And so we should look here also at some of the verbs for thought and nouns for thought that were common in the New Testament. The verb pisteuo means I trust or I believe. And with the prominence of faith and belief in the New Testament, it's no surprise that pisteuo shows up all over the place. The related noun is hepistis, the noun meaning trust or faith. It can also mean faithfulness, not the attitude of trust, but being trustworthy. And in this sense, it can even mean proof. If you have evidence proving your argument, that can be called pistis as well. I'd like to emphasize with both pisteuo and pistis that the basic idea is not giving cognitive assent to ideas. It's not thinking the right thing. The basic idea is trust. It's a more existential reliance on someone or something. Notice that pistis is a third declension noun of the polis type, so the genitive singular will be pisteos, and the nominative plural will be pisteis with epsilon iota sigma. Another third declension polis type noun is hesunedesis, which means conscience. And this is a noun that shows up in Paul's letters sometimes, and it's actually a concept that was developed by Stoic philosophy. And it's one of the places where we see concepts from Stoic philosophy being picked up and used in order to think about the significance of life in Christ. Another verb for thought is theoreo, which is first and foremost a verb for perception. It means to look closely at or examine something, but it can also be used metaphorically for thinking carefully about something, considering something. And in fact, verbs of vision are often used metaphorically for thought or insight. Finally, dokeo can mean I seem or I appear, but it can also mean I think, especially if you're talking about holding a particular opinion. And it can mean I think positively about something or I approve of something. Here are a few extra words to use in conversation. Taploion means a boat or ship, and honautes is the sailor that would sail on the ship. This honautes, notice, is a masculine first declension noun. The genitive then will be to nautu, and then all of the other case endings will be regular first declension case endings, not second declension endings, even though the gender is masculine.